There is a quiet distinction that most people never notice. It lives between what is spoken and what is felt, between words that pass through the air and words that leave a trace inside the heart. Many people send Durood every day. They recite it after prayer during moments of rest, sometimes even out of habit. And yet, if they pause long enough to observe themselves honestly, they may notice something unsettling. The heart still feels restless. The mind still returns to worry. Life still feels heavy in places it shouldn't. So the question arises, not as doubt but as reflection. What if the issue is not the remembrance itself, but the way it passes through us? There is a subtle truth known to those who walk the inner path. Not every act carries the same weight, even when it looks the same on the surface. Two people may speak the same words. One remains unchanged. The other slowly transforms. This difference does not come from effort alone or from sincerity as we usually define it. It comes from presence. Durood at its surface is speech, words shaped by the tongue, familiar, repeated, safe. But its deeper reality is something else entirely. It is alignment, a quiet turning of the inner world toward mercy. When spoken without awareness, it remains sound, beautiful sound perhaps, but sound nonetheless. When spoken with presence, it becomes something inscribed, not in memory, not in habit, but in the unseen order that governs how hearts soften and lives unfold. Have you ever noticed that some people seem to move through difficulty without being hardened by it? They face loss, delay, uncertainty, yet something in them remains steady. Their faces carry ease without effort. Their responses feel measured, not forced. This is not because they are spared hardship, and it is not coincidence. Often, without announcing it, their hearts remain connected to remembrance, not as an act they perform, but as a state they return to. Many of us believe that transformation comes through intensity, more effort, more words, more asking. But the inner path teaches something quieter. It suggests that what changes a life is not how loudly we speak, but how deeply we align. Durood, when it awakens the heart, does not push destiny. It softens the one walking through it. This is why some people send blessings often, yet feel unchanged, while others send them simply, quietly, and find their inner world slowly rearranging itself. The difference is not in the formula, it is in the presence behind it. So pause for a moment. When you send Durood, where are you? Is the heart present, or already rushing ahead to what it wants next? Are the words moving through you, or are you merely passing through them? This is not a rebuke, it is an invitation, because the secret power of Durood does not begin when circumstances change. It begins when the heart becomes available to alignment. And once alignment begins, something subtle shifts long before the outer world follows. And this is where the journey truly starts. To understand why remembrance changes some lives quietly and leaves others untouched, we have to step into a way of seeing the world that is older than analysis and deeper than explanation. This is where the teachings of Ibn Arabi gently enter, not as philosophy to be debated, but as a lens through which life begins to make sense. Ibn Arabi taught that nothing in existence is accidental, not an action, not a delay, not even a thought that returns again and again. Everything has an outward appearance and an inward reality. What we usually interact with is the surface, the form. But what truly shapes our experience is the inner reality moving beneath it. Every act, he explains, carries these two dimensions, one visible, one hidden. When the two are disconnected, the act loses its transformative power. It still exists, but it does not move the soul. When the two align, even the smallest action begins to reshape the inner world. Durood follows this same law. Its outward form is clear, words spoken upon the prophet, familiar phrases repeated with the tongue, but its inward reality is alignment with mercy itself. And alignment, according to Ibn Arabi, is never symbolic. It is structural. It determines how a servant moves through divine wisdom, not by force but by flow. This is why remembrance cannot be measured by repetition alone. 1,000 words spoken without presence may leave no trace. A single moment of aligned remembrance may soften years of resistance. This is not because Allah requires the words, but because the heart requires orientation before it can receive. Many people assume that prayer and remembrance function like requests submitted to the unseen speak enough, and eventually something must change. But Ibn Arabi offers a different understanding. He teaches that mercy already flows. What changes is not mercy itself, but the servant's position in relation to it. Some actions move against that current. They are filled with urgency, tension, and demand. Others move with it. They carry recognition, trust, and surrender. Durood belongs to the second category, not because of its wording, but because of what it acknowledges. When you send blessings upon the Prophet, you are not informing Allah of anything. You are placing yourself within a current that already exists. This is why Durood does not feel heavy when it is alive. It does not strain the heart. It does not exhaust the soul. Instead, it steadies. It aligns. It reorders the inner posture of the servant so that life begins to feel less like resistance and more like response. Ibn Arabi describes this as the difference between effort and harmony. Effort pushes, harmony moves. When the heart is aligned, even difficulty carries a different weight. Delay feels instructive rather than punishing. Silence feels spacious rather than empty. This does not mean that hardship disappears. It means that the servant no longer stands outside mercy, demanding entry. He finds himself already within it. So when Durood is spoken with presence, something subtle occurs. The heart stops negotiating. It stops insisting. It begins recognizing. And recognition in the language of the inner path is far more powerful than request. This is the law that governs the rest of this journey. Not reward, not transaction, but alignment. And once alignment begins, the unseen order responds, not always with immediate answers, but always with wisdom that knows when to arrive. And with this understanding, the question naturally deepens. If alignment changes how mercy reaches us, then what does that alignment look like in everyday life? How does it appear in people we know, in struggles we recognize, in moments that feel ordinary but carry something more? This is where we turn our gaze outward again, to what we see, but may not yet fully understand. If you observe life closely enough, you begin to notice something that statistics cannot explain. Two people face similar hardship. One becomes bitter, restless, weighed down by every delay. The other moves through the same pressure with a quiet steadiness, not untouched by pain, not immune to disappointment, but not broken by it either. You may have seen this in someone close to you, a parent who carries illness without complaint, a friend whose plans fell apart yet whose heart did not, a person whose life seems modest on the surface, yet whose presence brings calm into a room. They do not speak often about spirituality. They do not announce their practices, and yet something in them feels settled. This is not personality, and it is not denial. The inner path teaches that what we witness outwardly is often the echo of an inward state. When a heart is aligned, life does not necessarily become easier, but it becomes clearer. Difficulty still arrives, but it does not arrive as chaos. It arrives with proportion, with meaning, with limits. Many people assume that inner peace is the result of resolved circumstances, that once finances stabilize, relationships heal, or uncertainty lifts, the heart will finally rest. But lived experience often proves the opposite. Some people reach stability and remain anxious. Others remain in uncertainty and feel strangely anchored. So what creates this difference? Often it is not what they possess, but what they are connected to. Those whose hearts feel light are not free from struggle. They are free from resistance to struggle. They do not fight reality at every step. They respond rather than react. And this response is not passive, it is rooted in trust. In quiet ways, remembrance has shaped them, not as a task to complete but as a rhythm they return to. They do not rush Durood as a solution. They allow it to settle as a state. Over time, this changes how the heart meets the world. This is why they do not collapse when plans fail, why delay does not immediately feel like rejection, why silence does not terrify them. Their inner posture has already softened, and a softened heart does not bruise easily. It is important to say this clearly. They are not asking less because they care less. They are asking less because they trust more. Their remembrance is not driven by desperation, but by recognition. Recognition that mercy does not need to be chased, it needs to be met. Have you ever noticed how some people pause before responding, even when life presses them? How they seem to listen inwardly before moving outward? This pause is not hesitation, it is alignment. It is the heart checking its position before engaging the world. Durood, when it lives in the heart this way, becomes more than words spoken at certain times. It becomes an inner orientation, a reminder of where mercy flows from and where the servant stands in relation to it. This is why their faces often carry ease without effort, not because their lives are perfect, but because their hearts are no longer at war with reality. They have learned, slowly, quietly, that alignment changes the weight of everything it touches. So reflect gently on your own life. When difficulty arrives, does it feel chaotic or contained? When delay appears, does it feel cruel or instructive? And when you remember, does the heart soften, or does it remain tense, waiting for results? These questions are not meant to judge. They are meant to reveal. Because once we see the difference alignment makes in others, we begin to wonder how it might reshape our own inner world. And this curiosity leads us naturally to a more intimate question. What happens when prayer itself begins to feel heavy, and effort brings no opening at all? There comes a moment on every sincere path when effort no longer feels empowering. When prayer, once a source of comfort, begins to feel weighty. The words are still there. The routine remains intact, yet something inside resists, not out of rebellion but out of exhaustion. Many people reach this point quietly without naming it. They continue to pray, continue to ask, continue to hope, but the heart feels as though it is pushing against a closed door. This experience is more common than most admit. A person may fulfill every obligation. Their worship is consistent, their intentions are clean, and yet life feels stalled. Opportunities do not open, relief delays, even prayer begins to feel like effort rather than refuge. In such moments, it is easy to assume failure of faith, of worthiness, of divine favor, but the inner path offers a gentler explanation. Sometimes prayer feels heavy not because it is rejected, but because it is being carried by urgency. Imagine a man who came burdened by hardship. His nights were filled with supplication. His days were filled with worry. He did not complain to people, but inwardly he felt blocked. When he spoke of his prayers, he said, "I ask constantly, yet nothing moves." He was not accusing. He was confused. He was told something simple, almost unsettling in its calmness. You speak often to Allah about your needs, but how often do you send blessings upon the one through whom mercy flows? He paused, then answered honestly, occasionally. And he was told, then expect openings to appear occasionally. This was not spoken as rebuke, it was spoken as law. On the inner path, not every delay is punishment. Some delays are mirrors. They reflect the posture of the heart. Prayer driven by urgency presses forward, demanding relief. Prayer carried by alignment moves differently. It does not strain toward an outcome. It recognizes a source. Durood in this sense is not an additional request added to prayer. It is the vessel that reshapes how prayer travels. When remembrance passes through alignment, it does not arrive as demand. It arrives as trust. Many people knock endlessly on the door of circumstance. They plead with outcomes. They argue with timing. And in doing so, they unknowingly tighten the very state that needs softening. Durood opens a different door, not because Allah needs it, but because the heart does. There is a teaching known quietly among those who walk the path. When a servant forgets his own desire while sending blessings, Durood itself becomes his supplication. In that moment, something subtle happens. The breath slows, the heart loosens, and a need long buried rises, not from desperation but from depth. This is why some were advised. Begin your prayer with Durood, end it with Durood, and place your need gently between them. Not because the prayer would otherwise be rejected, but because alignment changes its weight. What passes through remembrance is never lost. It is reshaped. Without Durood, prayers may still rise. With it, they travel with honor. There are those whose needs are met before they even ask, not because they are special, but because their remembrance pleases Allah. And when remembrance pleases, response is no longer bound by urgency. Sometimes answers arrive quickly, sometimes they delay. But the one anchored in Durood understands something others struggle with. Delay itself can be mercy. Durood is not spoken to hurry destiny. It is spoken to trust it. And when prayer no longer feels heavy, it is not because life has resolved, but because the heart has stopped fighting the flow of mercy. And from here, the journey deepens, because there comes a point when Durood no longer feels like something you do at all, but something that begins to move through you. There is a moment on the path that cannot be planned. It does not arrive through effort nor through repetition alone. It comes quietly, often when the servant has stopped measuring outcomes. The words of Durood are still being spoken, but something within shifts. The tongue continues, yet the heart steps forward. And in that moment, remembrance changes its nature. At first, Durood is something you do. You choose the words. You decide the time. You begin and you end. But there comes a station where it no longer feels initiated by you. The words slow. The breath deepens. Awareness settles. And remembrance begins to feel like something that is happening through you, not something you are producing. This is the station where Durood becomes dua, not because a request has been added, but because the self has stepped aside. Ibn Arabi explains that when sincerity reaches completion, speech is no longer the agent. State becomes the agent. At this level, what matters is not what is asked, but how the heart is positioned. The servant is no longer negotiating with destiny. He is recognizing his place within it. Many seekers misunderstand supplication. They believe that dua must always be verbal, always formed, always intentional. But the people of inner knowledge speak of another kind of prayer, one that rises without words. It is carried by presence, not phrasing. And Durood, when it awakens the heart, becomes the doorway to this silent supplication. Have you ever experienced a moment when you were sending blessings, and suddenly the mind quieted without effort? When worry loosened its grip, not because it was resolved, but because it lost urgency. In such moments, a need may surface, not as anxiety, but as clarity. You recognize what truly matters. You see what has been weighing you down, and without asking directly, the heart releases it. This is why some were taught a simple instruction. Begin your prayer with Durood, end it with Durood, and place your need between them. Not as a formula, but as an orientation. Because when a prayer passes through the remembrance of the prophet, it is not rejected, it is refined. It is reshaped in a way that aligns with wisdom rather than desire. There are servants whose needs are fulfilled before they even find the words to ask, not because they are favored above others, but because their remembrance has become pleasing. Ibn Arabi states that when remembrance pleases Allah, response may precede request. The heart is answered before the tongue speaks. This does not mean that outcomes always appear immediately. Sometimes relief comes first as inner stillness. Sometimes clarity arrives before change. But the servant who has reached this station understands something essential. Not every answer arrives as an event. Some arrive as a state that makes waiting gentle. At this level, Durood no longer feels like something added to life. It becomes woven into breath, into pauses, into moments of uncertainty. The servant stops watching for signs and starts living within trust. And trust, once established, carries its own protection. This is the secret many overlook. Transformation does not always announce itself. Often it whispers, the heart softens, resistance fades, and suddenly what once felt unbearable feels navigable, not because the weight has vanished, but because the soul has found its alignment. And when alignment settles this deeply, destiny itself begins to feel less like an obstacle and more like a companion, guiding, shaping, and teaching with precision rather than force. This is the threshold where remembrance stops being an act and becomes a way of being. And from this threshold, the journey moves outward again, into how destiny responds when the servant no longer resists its flow. Many people carry a quiet fear that destiny is fixed against them, that no matter how much they try, something in life remains sealed, effort collapses, plans fail, doors close again and again. Over time, this creates a deep exhaustion, not of the body but of hope. And in that exhaustion, a dangerous belief can form, perhaps nothing will ever open. The inner path speaks gently to this fear. It does not deny destiny, nor does it promise control over it, but it reframes how destiny works. Ibn Arabi teaches that destiny is not rigid stone. It is receptive clay, shaped not by force but by light. And light does not strike, it touches, it reveals, it softens. Durood in this understanding is not a tool to rewrite divine decree. It is what moves the servant into a decree already written for ease. This distinction matters. Many believe that change comes only through struggle, through pushing harder, repeating more, exhausting the self until something gives. But the people of inner knowledge say something quieter. They say that destiny softens when the servant softens. That resistance delays not because Allah withholds, but because the heart has not yet aligned with how mercy flows. There was once a young man whose life felt sealed. Every effort collapsed, every plan failed, not because he was careless and not because he avoided responsibility. He worked, he planned, he prayed, yet nothing opened. Over time, frustration turned inward, not into anger but into confusion. He did not complain to people. He turned inward and asked for guidance. He was given something simple, almost disappointingly so. For a period, he was told to send blessings upon the prophet without attaching a request, not to demand change, not to force destiny, only remembrance. At first, nothing dramatic happened. No doors flew open, no problems disappeared, but something subtle shifted. The heaviness he carried began to lift. Anxiety loosened. The constant inner tension softened. He stopped fighting his life and began inhabiting it. And then quietly, openings followed. Not because he demanded them, but because his inner state had changed. Ibn Arabi explains that when the servant's inner posture aligns, destiny responds with precision. Not always quickly, not always visibly, but always accurately. The servant has not changed the decree. He has moved into the portion of it that carries ease. This is why the people of remembrance are never truly trapped. Even when circumstances tighten, their inward world remains expansive. They may face restriction outwardly, but inwardly they breathe. They trust. They remain connected. When doors close around you, when effort brings no fruit, when even prayer feels heavy, this is not abandonment. It is invitation, an invitation to soften rather than strain, to remember without demanding, to align rather than insist. Durood at this stage is no longer about results. It is about repositioning the heart. And when the heart finds its place, destiny no longer feels like an enemy standing in the way. It becomes a teacher, guiding, delaying, opening, and closing with wisdom rather than cruelty. So if life feels sealed right now, pause before concluding anything about yourself or your worth. Ask instead, has the heart softened enough to receive what is already written? Because often what we call delay is not denial, it is preparation, and the preparation does not happen in circumstances, it happens within. And when that preparation completes, something remarkable occurs, not always loudly, not always suddenly, but with a gentleness that feels unmistakably precise. There are moments during Durood that cannot be explained outwardly. The words continue, but the inner world grows quiet, not empty present, thoughts slow without effort, the body softens, and sometimes without warning tears appear, not the tears of grief and not the tears of relief, but something gentler and deeper, tears that arrive without a clear reason. Many people are confused by these moments. They wonder if they are becoming emotional or if something is wrong. But the people of the inner path understand this differently. These tears are not emotion. They are recognition. Ibn Arabi teaches that the soul does not awaken through knowledge alone, but through softening. Knowledge can inform the mind, but only softness opens the heart. And nothing softens the heart like sincere remembrance that passes beyond the tongue and settles within. When tears come during Durood, it is not weakness revealing itself. It is resistance dissolving. The soul remembers something it had forgotten, not as an idea, but as a state. It remembers what it was before fear tightened it, before disappointment shaped it, before expectation burdened it. This is why such moments often come unexpectedly. The servant is not searching for them. He is not performing for an outcome. He is simply present. And presence, when it becomes complete, reveals what was always near. There are those who spend years seeking signs, visions, confirmations, feelings that prove nearness. But Ibn Arabi speaks of awakening in quieter terms. He says that nearness is recognized by stillness. When the heart settles, when urgency fades, when trust replaces anxiety, this is closeness. In these moments, the servant may glimpse himself clearly, not as his failures, not as his wounds, but as something intact beneath them. This is not imagination. It is unveiling, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just clear. Durood at this stage no longer feels like words spoken upon the prophet. It feels like a journey. It begins with the tongue, passes through the heart, and awakens the soul. And when the soul awakens, desperation loosens its grip. The servant stops reaching outward and begins to carry something inward. This is why the people of remembrance do not rush outcomes. They understand that what opens inward reshapes what unfolds outward. They continue sending blessings, not to escape difficulty, but to remain aligned with truth. Because alignment does not erase hardship. It changes how the heart inhabits it. If tears come, they do not cling to them. If stillness appears, they do not demand it return. They simply remain present, because presence itself has become the gift. And when remembrance reaches this depth, something remarkable occurs. The servant no longer feels distant. Even in confusion, there is connection. Even in uncertainty, there is trust. Even in silence, there is companionship. This is the awakening that Durood carries, not loudly, not visibly, but deeply. And from this depth, the journey naturally widens again. Because a heart that has softened does not remain closed in on itself. It begins, quietly, to carry mercy outward, into words, into actions, into the way life is lived. And this is where remembrance stops being private and begins shaping the world around the one who carries it. When remembrance reaches the depth where the heart has softened and resistance has eased, its effects do not remain hidden for long, not because the servant announces them, but because the inner state begins to shape the outer life in subtle, unmistakable ways. A heart aligned with mercy naturally moves differently through the world. Those who carry Durood as a state are often difficult to describe. They are not always outwardly spiritual. They do not speak constantly about faith or display their practices, yet their presence feels composed. Their responses are measured. Even when circumstances tighten, they do not scatter inwardly. This is because remembrance has changed their center of gravity. They no longer rush outcomes. They do not panic at delay. They have learned through experience rather than theory that not every door is meant to open at once. Some open outwardly through opportunity, relief, provision. Others open inwardly through clarity, patience, acceptance. Both matter, and the inward openings often arrive first. Such people understand something many struggle to accept, that forcing results often closes the very paths we hope to walk. They allow life to unfold with attentiveness rather than anxiety. When effort is required, they act. When waiting is required, they wait. And in both states, their hearts remain present. This does not mean that they are passive or detached. It means that they have learned where to place their weight. Their trust is no longer invested entirely in outcomes. It rests in alignment. Durood at this stage is no longer recited only during prayer or quiet moments. It appears in the pauses between actions, in the way they speak, in how they respond to disappointment. When anger could arise, they soften. When fear could dominate, they steady. This is not discipline. It is the natural result of a heart that remembers where mercy flows from. Over time, this inward change begins to reshape the outer world. Relationships soften. Decisions become clearer. Even hardship, when it arrives, feels less chaotic. Not because life has become predictable, but because the heart has become anchored. The people of this path do not measure progress by visible success. They measure it by how quickly they return to presence, how easily they remember, how little they resist what unfolds. This is why they are not easily shaken. Their stability does not depend on circumstances remaining favorable. There is a quiet dignity in this way of living, a steadiness that does not need to be explained. And those who encounter it may not know why they feel calmer in its presence, but they feel it nonetheless. Mercy, once carried inwardly, does not remain contained. It moves outward, gently, without effort. This is the fruit of Durood when it awakens the soul. Not constant ease, not uninterrupted happiness, but a way of being that remains intact even when life presses hard. And when life presses again, as it always does, the one who carries remembrance does not ask, "Why is this happening to me?" Instead, the heart quietly asks, "How am I meant to meet this?" From this place, the journey does not end. It completes its circle. Because remembrance, once established as a state, begins to reveal something essential, not about destiny, not about outcomes, but about nearness itself. And it is here, in this quiet realization, that the path gently comes to rest, not with conclusions, but with awareness. This path was never about reaching a final answer. It was never about completing a number of recitations or arriving at a dramatic turning point. It was about arriving at a state where the heart no longer feels distant, where urgency softens into trust, and where remembrance itself becomes enough. Durood, when it awakens the soul, does not always change life loudly. Often, it changes you first. And when the heart settles, when resistance fades, when stillness replaces struggle, that is nearness, not measured by signs or outcomes, but by ease within. So as you return to your own life, carry this question gently with you. Have you ever noticed how remembrance changed your heart before it changed your situation? If this reflection resonated with you, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Voice of Sufism, and turn on the bell icon so you don't miss future reflections. And if you feel moved, share your experience in the comments. Your words may quietly help someone else on their path. You'll find related reflections appearing on your screen now. Continue the journey at your own pace. Because remembrance does not end here, it deepens. Peace be with you.